So do you think there's been any change since the Leveson Inquiry? Has it had a positive effect, or has things continued just like they were?
Neither. It has got so much worse, it's unreal. I mean, a very eminent professor friend of mine, when I was talking to him in the pub, he said not long after the election that he had told his students that because of the Leveson Inquiry, you wait to see how the press behave in the next election. They'll be much more subdued and what have you. And of course, that it was absolutely the opposite. I mean, I've never seen the mainstream press be so vehemently right-wing. You know, and people say, oh, it's, you know, centre-right. It's not. It's extreme right. You know, if you compare, you know, the reports today about immigration with reports in the 1890s and the 1920s and the 1930s about Jews fleeing Hitler, it's worse now. You know, I mean, the way the Daily Mail, for example, you know, would talk of, you know, of those immigrants scurrying around the boats, hiding their gold whenever anyone came to see, you know, that was how they talked about Jews, who we now look back and say that was absolutely disgraceful and it was wrong, but it's happening again, and it's happening again with much more vehemence and much more intensity. You know, there are some concerns that people genuinely hold, but I think a lot of this has to do with the use of those scapegoats as a diversion. It's absolutely no coincidence that there was a banking crisis, not a debt crisis. We have no debt crisis. We have a financial crisis caused by banks. It's no surprise that when that happens, then we hear a lot more about, you know, benefit fraud and benefit street and all of the poor people and they're horrible like cockroaches, and all of the immigrants, they're the ones who are causing the problems, whether it's in house prices or whether it's in economic performance. And that's all being massively encouraged by the press. Why? Because they're owned by very rich people, you know, who don't want banking regulation or restructuring of the economy or taxation, you know, because I think Sky still hasn't paid any tax in this country, yeah? News Corporation pays almost no tax in this country, or News UK as it's now called. So they like the arrangement. The Barclay brothers are registered in Jersey, so they don't have to pay taxes. So, you know, I think this kind of hysteria that's being whipped up, whether about immigrants or about Jeremy Corbyn or whatever, can be clearly traced in terms of the interests of the newspaper owners. Now, that filters through news organisations, through editorial lines all the way down to junior reporters, who themselves are scrambling to make a living. If you read, you know, say something like Hack by Graham Johnson, he says this exactly. He says, I'm left-wing. I wanted to be like John Pilger. But in order to get into the media industries, I had to sell my soul to the devil. And I thought I'd only need to do it for a year. And then it became, I only need to do it for 2 years, and then 3 years. And then it became my career of lying to people, destroying people's lives, and you know, getting people to hate each other. And he said it very clearly in his book, and he worked for the News of the World. He said, you know, the executives hate the readership, and they want them to hate each other because that's what sells, yeah? And that's become, you know, really intensified. The media's become emboldened, okay? The only person who could have done anything about it was David Cameron, who's mates with them all. We know this from the Leveson Inquiry with, you know, the editor of The Sun, with Rupert Murdoch. They call each other all the time. You know, you saw in the film the text messages between Jeremy Hunt and James Murdoch. Yeah. They are all in it together, you know. And I think now they know there's no significant governmental opposition, they've got no reason to behave. Yeah. Why would they?
So what kind of advice would you give to people like yourself who want to make a film like The Fourth Estate? Because we talked a lot tonight about alternative media and how to get your message across, and I think there's lots of people with great ideas, but maybe they don't have the skills to make a film like that, or they don't have the resources and the cameras to do it. So what kind of advice would you give?
Okay, I mean, if you wanted to start out, most people have smartphones and they have pretty decent cameras on them that can do high definition film. Yeah. The audio on it's okay. Audio is very important. People forget that about filmmaking. The audio is really important. So you can start. You can film people. You can make films with cameras. There's a group called Vision on TV who train people to do it, and they do that for free. There's relatively cheap editing equipment. If you were so inclined, you could also steal it from from a BitTorrent. And I've never studied film. No one ever taught me anything about filmmaking. I started off by sitting there with an editing program open, and a YouTube video that I would just sit there with, kind of going, I need to do this, do a search for it, find a video on it, someone tells you how to do it. It's quite time consuming, you need to go through lots of different videos so you find exactly what you want to do. And then you learn how to do it, then you go on to the next bit. So the technical skills are actually quite basic and quite easy to learn, and there are lots of people out there who are, making these YouTube videos and what have you. But I think the most important thing, having kind of trained myself, I realised that a lot of the technical stuff is quite easy. The more difficult stuff is the kind of intellectual work. It's the kind of way of making films that don't do cliches. So with The Fourth Estate, my favourite comment anyone's ever made was, I don't kind of get what you're saying about council estates. Are they bad or good? Yeah? Now why is that? Because when you film a council estate, the inclination, given how they're seen in the mainstream media, is perhaps for some moody music, or to take some pictures of rubbish on the floor, or just showing the grittiness of a council estate. But actually, people who live there aren't like that. They're nice people, and they live, sort of very nice lives sometimes in terms of the communities they engage in and create and what have you. So I kind of thought, council estate, flowers, foreground some flowers and have council, because you can still talk about class divisions without having to make it look cliched or look, or look as if it's a kind of a bad thing. And I think that's what people often slip into with films, because we're so used to seeing those forms of representations in the mainstream that people look out to reproduce those things. So I think the thing about good filmmaking is to make films that don't reproduce the cliches, that don't reproduce the kind of dominant ways of looking, especially at vulnerable people or minorities and things, but actually to make films that kind of empower them and speak from those perspectives themselves, rather than trying to impose another perspective onto them.
Yeah, that's a lot of interesting questions. My final question is there anything else in the pipeline? Are you going to make anything else quite soon? Yeah,
I'm in the middle of making another one, which I've kind of just been saying to people, this is my last screening, I can't do this anymore, but I forgot. We're making the follow-up to my first film, or Michael Chan and my first film, which was called Secret City, about the Corporation of London. And we kind of ended that with the crisis and with the absolute greatest propaganda campaign in human history to convince people that the economic crisis is a debt crisis. Okay, it's not a debt crisis. There is no debt crisis, right? All you need to do if you have too much debt is cancel some of the debt. Right, that happens all of the time. If you owe, a water company lots of money and you can't pay it, or send it to a debt collection agency, he'll say, just give us 400 quid instead of 800. At least we get something, we can write all of that off. And we realise that you can actually do that on an international scale. Yeah. So this notion that we need to starve the poor or tip disabled people out of their wheelchairs because they cause this economic crisis is just a phenomenal lie. And it's a phenomenal lie that suits, again, all of these owners of the media organisations and bankers and economists and politicians and what have you. So we've been going around filming in Greece and Spain and looking at kind of, campaigns against this kind of debt ideology and kind of ways that people have proposed other ways out, printing money, for example, or reforming the banks, or making people pay, or making corporations pay the taxes they actually owe. But effectively, essentially, at the end of the day, the problem is finance capitalism. The problem is that, especially in this country, with London, with the City of London, we're run by a sector of the economy that's unproductive, that doesn't do anything other than speculate on misery, largely, and that really has to be the thing that we ultimately reform and turn the world back into a kind of productive society. One of the things I've been hearing about recently is, the very fact that we don't need to work 5-day weeks. There's absolutely no need. Technologically, we don't need it. We can work 3-day weeks, 6 hours a day, in order to produce all of the things we need to produce. But the thing is, that's not good for the sorts of control that capitalism needs over us, So we could do that. We could fundamentally change working relations, create full employment, have a basic wage, that everybody earns a kind of basic minimum. There are all of these kind of economic arguments, none of which get into the mainstream because they don't benefit those elites. So this is like the new film Money Puzzles, is trying to explore these alternative economics.
When can we expect that out? I don't
hopefully around May, June, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's turning into a very big project now.
Okay, I think we all look forward to seeing that. Well, it was lovely. Thanks very much for coming along with you. And the film Fourth Estate was absolutely brilliant. So thanks very much, and hope to see you in the future.
Massive pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.